This is Channel 2 News with Robert Trout, brought to you by Pell Mell, a cigarette for people who are particular about taste. And Eastern Airlines flying the quietest kind of jet airliner, the Whisper Jet. Sitting in for Mr. Trout tonight is Jim Jensen.
Good evening, everyone. An employee of a Times Square money exchange was wounded by a police bullet today as two patrolmen fired several shots while capturing an armed bandit. The shooting took place in the Deacon Company office at Broadway and 42nd Street. And among those involved was a clerk, Linda Olson, who was used briefly as a shield by the bandit and later identified as a Staten Island sailor. Along with Miss Olson, he also threatened two other clerks, David Lucas, who was wounded in the arm by a ricocheting bullet, and Carlos Branco, who later told Mary Pengalis what happened when patrolman John Tobin and Richard Lepidra answered the store's hold-up alarm.
He said, "Is something wrong?" And I didn't answer because I didn't know what to answer. Then he says again, "Is something wrong? What has happened?" And he takes out his gun because then I had to react because maybe he thought I was one of the burglars. And I said, "There's a stick-up and there's a man with a gun in the back." So immediately I went under the desk and he fired a warning shot. Then was when the other employee came out and another policeman came in.
There was a man with a gun behind the counter. He pointed the gun at us and clicked off 3 shots.
What did you do then?
We ducked down. My partner, returning the fire, fired 2 shots back at him. He then ran to the rear of the store, ducking behind a partition. He then ducked out again and raised the gun, and we both fired a shot apiece simultaneously at him.
Did any of these bullets hit him?
No.
What did he do then?
He then grabbed a girl employee in one of the rear offices in the store and pulled her in front of him, using her as a shield.
Did he say anything?
He told us to get out of his way or he'd kill us or kill the girl, but he wouldn't be taken.
What did you say?
We asked him to release the girl, that he couldn't get by us or get out of the store.
And did he?
Not at first, no.
How did you convince him?
Well, we told him that there were many more cops outside in the street and that he certainly couldn't get away. There was no point in hurting the girl to please release her, which he did.
What did you do then?
He dropped his gun on the floor and put his hands over his head, and he asked us not to shoot him. Please don't shoot. And then we took him prisoner.
The bandit's been identified as Frank Trzaskis of Staten Island, AWOL from his New London, Connecticut base. The police say he was out seeking some quick funds for a New Year's Eve celebration. His gun, which misfired each time he tried to fire it, was identified as a Luger. And as a footnote to this all, a woman clerk is reportedly identifying Trzaskis as the man who robbed the same money exchange of $2,700 just a year ago, and even talked to him about it. Coming up, an exclusive interview with a reputed member of the infamous Cosa Nostra, or at least he's accused of being a member. We'll have those details after this for Pell Mell.
You hear it everywhere.
Particular about taste?
You bet I'm particular, and my Pell Mells prove it.
Particular about taste?
You bet I'm particular, and my Pell Mells prove it.
Particular about taste?
You bet I'm particular, and my Pell Mells prove it.
Particular people take particular pleasure in the good taste of Pell Mell.
Why? Because Pell Mell's natural mildness means just one thing: smooth, pleasing flavor. Flavor that's blended in, over, under, around, and through the finest tobaccos money can buy to bring you satisfying flavor particularly good.
So get particular pleasure like particular people do in the good taste of Pell Mell.
Smoke a long cigarette that's long on flavor. Buy Pell Mell Famous Cigarettes. Outstanding. And they are mild. From the American Tobacco Company.
John Lombardozzi of Brooklyn is 38 years old. He's married, has 2 sons. He's been in trouble with the law, both federal and local, for a long time. And most recently, he was arrested this week for alleged involvement in a rather large jewelry swindle. Lombardozzi told me today that all of his troubles with the law began about a year ago when, during the course of his father's funeral, an FBI agent was seriously beaten. He served 5 months of a 20-month sentence on that count, is currently free on appeal of the verdict. He also feels he's been rather unduly harassed by both police and press, and he rankles greatly at efforts to link him up with the Cosa Nostra family, of which his older brother, Carmen, is a reputed member. Today, John Lombardozzi, nattily attired in a black suit, manicured nails, invited us in so he could tell his side of the story. This is his family's apartment in Brooklyn. It is handsomely furnished with Italian provincial, lavender rugs and drapes, a piano that no one's learned to play yet. Lombardozzi said he has not worked for 10 months and lives by borrowing from his friends and an occasional dollar or two at the track. He and his wife, most charming in the interview, in which he repeatedly blamed the funeral assault and his brother Carmen's notoriety for his troubles.
Ever since he was a visitor to Appalachian, they certainly have been investigating him and have been on my family ever since.
You say he was a visitor. You don't say he was a participant in that conflict.
Well, I don't know. I wasn't there. And I could only go by the newspapers that he was there.
And the FBI now thinks that there's a connection between you and your brother, right?
Well,
other than the fact that you're brothers.
Well, the only crime that I feel that I've committed or that I'm involved with simply is that my name is Lombardozzi and that Carmine is my brother.
Is Carmine involved at all with a certain Cosa Nostra family? Carlo, what is the last name?
I don't know what you're referring to.
Carlo Gambini?
Gambino. Gambino? Oh, I don't know. I don't know if he's involved. They say he is, but I don't know.
You've never associated with your brother in business at all?
No, not at all. Outside of the fact that he is my brother, and we're loyal to in respect that we are brothers, loyal in blood. Let me put it that way to you. But that's it. I have nothing to do with my brother in respect to any businesses or any other operations of any kind.
Never at all any labor relations things at all?
No, never.
Because I bring it up because Carmen has been accused of labor racketeering.
Well, he's been accused of a lot of things, but like I say, I'm not my brother's keeper. And I'm independent of all things he may have been involved with.
Well, John, you point out that you're not your brother's keeper, but do you feel in a way, I realize it's a tough question. I have a brother also. That your brother in a way has brought a great deal of grief and problem on your family?
Well, I don't think he has personally. It's the fact that the publicity that was attributed to the Appalachian Convention and all the things that have occurred since then and all the publicity stemming from that particular convention certainly has hurt the family and certainly has given us plenty of grief. No question about it.
Do you and your brother ever discuss these things at all?
No, we don't. I never speak to my brother in reference to anything like this.
Now, to a recent case, John, according to District Attorney, you and your brother were involved in a jewelry incident. And your brother, he's getting out of jail today, isn't he, from a contempt citation?
From a contempt citation.
Was there a swindle?
No.
What happened?
Well, first, I must say, in all due respect, my brother has nothing to do whatsoever with that deal, at all. And I use the term that deal because I'm getting so used to being indicted since the funeral that I expect anything to happen. But my brother has not been involved in that. That was a legitimate transaction, and it will be brought out in the courts. That was a legitimate deal.
He also talked much about the assault on the FBI agent, a key witness that lied and is currently hiding in fear of his life, his involvement in securities and other alleged criminal attacks and harassment. Tomorrow on this broadcast, you will hear John Lombardozzi tell his side of that assault case and why he wants a congressional investigation, which he says will clear his good name. Another man was indicted along with John Lombardozzi in that $94,000 jewelry swindle, Michael Scandifia of Hinsdale, New Jersey, and he turned himself in today, one day after Lombardozzi. Scandifia, known as Mike Scandy, spent a rather busy day coming from the district attorney's office to be booked here at the Elizabeth Street Police Station, moving on to headquarters to be photographed, and then going on to criminal court for arraignment on charges of grand larceny. Scandifia and Lombardozzi are accused of swindling one firm of the jewels, then turning right around and selling them to another gem company for about 2/3 of the original retail price. New York is getting quite ready now to ring out the old and ring in the new after this message from Eastern Airlines.
It's morning in Puerto Rico. The sun and the surf wake the fabled dog of San Geronimo, and this exciting island comes alive. The sun warms a fishing village, tans a sun worshiper at Vega Baja, and kisses the greens at Dorado Beach. Most people choose this one to the sun because Eastern service is as warm as the destination. We've added more jets than ever. Eastern.
Fly Eastern, number one to the sun.
Every week, 45 Eastern jets leave New York for Puerto Rico. Be on one of them by calling your travel agent or Eastern.
About 40 minutes ago, the National Safety Council and the Newswire services began that holiday ritual of counting just how many lives are going to end on the nation's highways along with the end of the old year. It was too early to be included in the New Year's statistics, but a man identified as Jacinti Colombo of Franklin Square lost his life when his car was struck by a Long Island Railroad train at Stewart Manor and reduced to a pile of junk. Railroad officials believe the driver went around a warning gate which barred the right lane of the roadway. Buses were pressed into service to move passengers from the railroad's Hempstead branch, which was blocked from about 4 a.m. till 8 a.m., to other stations. The outbound track was cleared first, and commuters waited at an unaccustomed station in order to get to work in Manhattan. And a traffic tie-up hit the Van Wyck Expressway this afternoon after a westbound truck overturned near the World's Fair site at Flushing Meadows. No one was hurt, but traffic was certainly blocked in both directions. And this would certainly be a very appropriate place to say, drive carefully. Don't become a New Year's statistic. We'd like to have you around next year. And still on the subject, holiday travel got underway rather early today, but not as early as Christmas Eve and not quite as heavy. The airline scheduled more than 125 extra flights to accommodate New Year's passengers, but only 10 of these flights were put on for today. The traffic is going to get still heavier starting tomorrow when the big return rush begins. Workers began their exodus from the city in the early afternoon, and workmen began beefing up the vulnerable areas before the influx of revelers once again fills up the island of Manhattan. And Channel 2 is going to be present at a somewhat barricaded Times Square tonight for the traditional ringing out of the old and ringing in of the new, which will occur, as you know, of course, at midnight. And other preparations were going on inside all over town for the welcoming in of the bouncing baby 1965. Tonight come the celebrations, tomorrow the resolutions, and the day after, who knows? And now the sports news from Frank Gifford, who is going to be taking it rather easy tonight while others are out celebrating. Why? Well, Frank has to go bowling tomorrow. About those bowls, Frank, what?
Well, Jim, these bowls are the annual kind, and tomorrow they'll take over the entire control of the nation as the top games of the holiday season start early and run late. Progressively across the country, bleary-eyed football fans will watch the Sugar Bowl game from New Orleans featuring Syracuse and LSU, the Cotton Bowl game in Dallas with Arkansas and Nebraska, and the Rose Bowl game in Pasadena, which will match Oregon State and Michigan. Then, if that's not enough, for the first time on a New Year's Day, or rather a New Year's night, the Orange Bowl will take place in Miami, matching the nation's #1 team, Alabama, and last year's national champions from the University of Texas. This particular game seems to be taking a back seat to the financial affairs of Alabama's quarterback, Joe Namath. In all probability, Namath won't even get to play because of a knee injury, but it's expected that shortly after the game he'll sign a contract with the New York Jets for 3 years at $100,000 a year, plus some bonus spending money in the area of $70,000 or $80,000. I've never seen him play, but he must be awfully good, or somebody awfully confused. When an organization can pay an untried football player with a bad knee the kind of money that a decade ago would have enabled him to buy his own ball club. Well, maybe that's what he's going to do. Probably the best game of tomorrow's bowls will be the Cotton Bowl game when undefeated Arkansas meets once defeated Nebraska. Frank Broyles' Razorbacks were rated #2 in the nation at the end of the season, and many observers felt they were #1. Broyles talked about those ratings and also the game tomorrow against Nebraska.
Well, we'd like to show fans that we have a great football team. I don't believe we can displace Alabama as the #1 team in the AP and UP poll, but we can show everybody that we've got a good football team if we can regain what we had in November.
And then, of course, if you win in the Cotton Bowl game, there's that Grantland Rice Trophy.
The Grantland Rice Trophy is awarded to the team that looks the best after the bowl games, and we're shooting for that, too. But Nebraska first.
Right. Take them as they come. What about injuries? Do you have everyone physically fit for
I
this
think
game?
everybody will be physically fit, and we're looking forward to the game. Our team want to play well, and I think we will.
Coach, in the last 4 bowl games, Arkansas has lost 3 of them. Any special reason for that?
Well, we run up against a better football team, and particularly in the last 2 years when we met Mississippi, the #1 team in the Sugar Bowl, and Alabama, the #1 team in '61.
Frank Broyles, Arkansas's head coach. And tomorrow that game, the Cotton Bowl from Dallas, will be brought to you here on Channel 2, starting at 1:45. Jim?
Thank you, Frank, and Happy New Year. The police in Lake Mohawk, New Jersey, finally put the stopper in a long series of teenage drinking parties with the arrests of 77 youngsters who were whooping it up a bit in a vacant house. But before springing the raid, the police first had to get the permission of the owner of the house, whose son was the party's host. The Lake Mohawk police say this party 2 nights ago was the 7th in the string of such parties, but this was the first time they'd received permission to enter the private property and cork up the drinking. Meanwhile, the police have also warned that legal action is going to be taken against the parents of teenage drinkers in another New Jersey town about 25 miles away in Short Hills. The police have also cracked down on teenage drinking. They arrested 10 youngsters there last night after a party in a luxurious home which was attended by 70 teenagers in all. When it comes to those foreign movies, the titles are not quite as important as the subtitles. Gene Parr has a report for us on that problem. Is it a problem, Gene?
Well, it is, as a matter of fact, Jim. Millions of New Yorkers read the writings of Herman G. Weinberg this year and every other year. They devour the words as fast as they can, and in most cases would be completely lost without them, for Mr. Weinberg writes the English subtitles for many of the foreign films shown in this country. The Dean of Subtitles, as he's called, has done approximately 400 foreign films since 1929, when talkies first started. And here's an example of this type of film.
Ah, t'as vu? C'est un peu tard pour t'énerver, mon vieux. Fais comme moi, souffre avec le sourire. Bon, allez, fous-moi le camp.
Regardez, vous avez l'air moins intelligent.
Vous connaissez les sucres Vigier?
Oui.
C'est moi. Vous avez entendu...
Every scene is observed on the Moviola, a machine which measures dialogue. Mr. Weinberg and his assistants spend many hours peering into the viewer. The built-in problem, unfortunately, is that audiences can't read as fast as actors can speak, and especially French actors. We visited Titre Sound Studios on Broadway, where Mr. Weinberg had just finished screening a film, and asked him what was the next step.
I am now going through the second step, which is to measure the length of the dialogue of each speech in the film by a counter that is on this machine. And when my assistant gets through, he will turn over to me a lot of footages. And from the footages, I will then, in some quiet nook in my study, write the titles for the film.
When we see, or rather we hear, a great deal of a foreign language on the screen, and then all of a sudden there's a subtitle like certainly, and I always wonder, isn't that pretty heavy condensing?
That's not only heavy condensing, it's morally and aesthetically wrong, and you'll never find that in the films I do.
Well, how do you get around the language barrier?
Well, I'm most fluent in the 3 languages that I work with chiefly, and that's French, German, and Italian. But then, of course, there come languages which I don't know, like Japanese, and I have done some Japanese films. But there I work with someone who does know the language, and we go over it word by word. But the final English version on the screen is always mine.
Do people prefer the original language and subtitles, or do they like the foreign films with English dubbed in?
Oh, I think there's no question that audiences for foreign films prefer the films in the original language with English titles. The proof is that every foreign film, new foreign film that opens in New York opens in a titled version.
No matter how good you are in condensing and translating in these foreign films, do you still lose a lot of the flavor and the music of the language?
No. I can cite 2 films that were very popular in New York, The Organizer and Seduced and Abandoned, 2 very richly flavored Italian films which went over marvelously with the critics and the public. And so I know that there's no question that there is no loss. There's no loss that amounts to anything, whereas there would have been a loss for sophisticated New York audiences if the entire Italian had been taken off the screen and substituted with English.
However, preserving the original flavor and music of a language in translation is still a universal problem. And it's difficult in reverse. For example, the Russians seem to have considerable trouble translating English into Russian, not only in films, but in the theater as well. As Lee Jordan reported earlier this week, the big hit of Moscow is the Russian version of My Fair Lady called Меня Прекрасна Леди. And in the song, The Rain in Spain, so musical sounding in English, it had to be dropped because of the unmusical translation, Idiot dojď v Испания. But will subtitles work in the theater? For that, мы теперь будем спрашивать Lee Jordan.
Well, Gene, actually, Broadway imported a musical from Rome with subtitles this year called Rugantino, and the subtitles worked fine, but Broadway found that Rugantino was not up to its standards. I think that'll be the main difficulty. CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite became a Broadway star last night. He walked on unannounced with Julie Harris to take a bow after the final curtain of Ready When You Are, CB. Walter got a good hand from the audience, too. Actually, Cronkite's been starring on Broadway every night since the show opened through a bust of him that's featured in it as a running gag. In the audience last night were Mrs. Cronkite, their teenage daughters, and Walter's mother. Tonight on Channel 2, the Munsters are here at 7:30. Perry Mason takes on the case of the ruinous road at 8. Sammy Davis, E.D. Gourmet, Peter Lawford, and Florence Henderson play Password at 9. Paul Ford and a seal outmug each other on the Baileys of Balboa at 9:30. And it's the King of the Hill on the Defenders tonight at 10.
Who killed Vince Martiva?
Not me. What am I, on the witness stand?
No, but you're going to be. If I'm going to defend you, I want the truth. I want everything you know about the killing.
I don't know anything. I told you I have nothing to do with any of this.
Who did?
He knows.
Do you know?
No, but he does, don't you, mister? He knows everything.
What's the matter with you?
Who killed Martiva?
I can't tell you that.
But you know.
Yes.
That's Eileen McMahon and Albert Decker with the Defenders at 10 tonight. Esther Williams and Vivian Blaine are on The Late Show at 11:20. It's called Skirts Ahoy, and it's a Happy New Year from Channel 2 at 11:55 at Times Square with Jim Jensen.
Wonder how breezy it's going to be out there. Incidentally, on this whole matter of dubbing, the voices you hear right now are not ours. We're doing this whole broadcast in French. There are other voices in English coming in from another room. We'll have a look ahead at the New Year's weather and a look back at the old year's money. After this, from Arnold Baker's.
A woman will tell you food shopping is a matter of decisions, decisions, decisions. And you know, in the bakery department, the average woman makes decisions in a matter of seconds. Now, here's Gloria Ocon to tell you how to make the right split-second decisions.
I simply look for the Arnold label because I know that Arnold makes better products. For example, they use rare spring wheat flour, unbleached, because it's more healthful that way. AA 93 score butter, the best, pure natural ingredients like white clover honey, and time, the precious ingredient of extra time to give each product all the care it needs. So, to recognize high quality instantly, just look for the Arnold name on delicious breads, rolls, cookies, muffins, stuffing, coffee, Firehouse Jubilee tomato cocktail, the whole family of fine foods from Arnold.
And so we thusly arrive at the question of what the weather is going to be like tonight. The official forecast for New York and vicinity this New Year's Eve, clear and cold, quite windy, with temperatures dropping into the upper 20s by morning, and the winds are certainly worth mentioning, northwesterly at 20 to 30 miles an hour with higher gusts tonight, diminishing tomorrow, which, by the way, is going to be sunny with temperatures in the upper 30s. And the outlook for Saturday, increasing cloudiness and milder. Right now, reasonably near to Times Square, the temperature is 39 degrees, humidity is 46%, the barometer 30.27 and rising. The winds from the west now steadily at 17 miles an hour with gusts up to 33. And a final note from the weatherman on the year almost just passed. This has been the driest year since the Weather Bureau began keeping records in 1869. It's the fourth straight year of below average rainfall. more than 9 inches below normal that is, and almost an inch drier than the previous record year of 1910. So if you feel a little bit parched, there's a reason. And what better night to be thirsty than this one? And when they shut up shop at the stock market today, the closing song was something of a surprise. John Quirt has a comment on that and a long look back at the financial year. John?
Well, Jim, the stock market wound up the year on a musical note. This afternoon, word spread across the stock exchange floor that spontaneous year-end singing would begin shortly before 3 p.m. And right on schedule, many of the traders set aside their business and burst into song. The song the final session of the year is traditional on Wall Street. Someone today suggested the traders add Old Lang Syne to their repertoire. The answer came back that not everyone knew the words. But it was all in the spirit of fun, and the brokers clearly had a lot to sing about in '64. Half of all stocks listed on the big board gained during the year, while half showed losses. But blue chips in '64 performed well, shrugging off one crisis after another, taking in stride both the election and the abrupt change in the Kremlin. And the blue chip loaded industrial average rose more than 100 points for the year. At their peak in mid-November, industrials were just 9 points short of the 900 mark. Volume for the year, a fantastic 1,236 and some odd million shares, slightly higher than in '63, and of course, that meant increased commissions and incomes for brokerage firms. Among the most talked about stocks of the year, Texas Gulf Sulphur, finally finishing with a gain of more than 27 points on the strength of its Canadian silver strike. If you'd bought General Motors the first of the year, tonight you'd have about a $19 profit in each share. In Chrysler, your profit would be about the same. AT&T wound up the year with more than a point loss, and Comsat, the wonder stock of the year, finished with a gain of more than $33 a share, a real moneymaker for those who bought in last June at a price of $20. The final day, like the year itself, was a strong one. Industrials tacked on 5.44, rails 0.40, utilities 0.41, Standard & Poor's 0.45, on a volume of about 6.5 million shares. Making money in the stock market is hard work like everything else, but it was perhaps less difficult for many this year, especially those who ignored the tipster and stuck to the blue chips. On Saturday at 7, we'll interview investment expert Edmund Tabell about the market outlook for 1965. Jim?
Thanks, John. From England on this last day of 1964, a note in the news on Cecil Rudkin, who spent 1 hour on his hands and knees at the front door of a locked bank, tinkering with the lock as hundreds of passers-by passed by without a word and equally ignored by the cop in the corner. Rudkin's a locksmith, and the bank had hired him to open up the jammed lock. But he's worried, really, because nobody asked him what in the world he was doing there. And then this is Jerry Dick of Putnam City, Oklahoma, with her own solution of what to do with empty beer cans after tonight's party. Use them for rollers. And now, as we wind up 1964 and get ready for 65, we certainly want to express a lot of appreciation for the efforts of some of the people behind the scenes that have helped Channel 2 News get on the air throughout the year. To our technical director, George Keck, our audio man, Romeo Warrenta, video man, Tony Filippi, our cameraman, and the rest of the technical crews, the stage manager, the stage crews, and the people in sound effects and makeup, to assignment editor Jack Fox and his staff, and our film editors, Bob Forty, Jim Richardson, Larry Lowry, Vic Cromwell, Don Klein, and their supervisor, Bill Kling. Our graphic artists, Ben Cantor, Joe Mealy, and Tony Vespoli. Associate director, Jim McMahon. Our program assistants, Mike Fagan and Gene Montefiore. First time all year I pronounced that name correctly. And our production supervisor, Briggs Ball. And from Bob Trout, who is home this New Year's Eve with laryngitis, a Happy New Year and a very good 1965 to all of you. I hope to see you at 11 o'clock tonight. If I don't, Happy New Year.
This has been Channel 2 News with Robert Trout, brought to you by Arnold Bakers, makers of fine bread, rolls, cookie pops, and stuffing. Sitting in for Mr. Trout tonight has been Jim Jensen. Portions of this broadcast were pre-recorded.